Drawing is probably one of the most popular mediums of art because of how accessible it is. This means we can use any sort of simple drawing tool to kind of create a drawing of whatever subject matter that we choose. However, sometimes we want to draw something that is kind of complicated, but we don't necessarily understand how to develop our drawing skills to get to that point. With that being said, hey guys, my name is Matt. Welcome to another video by artandcontext.org, where we explore various art-related topics. And in today's video, we will be learning a chronological progression of drawing exercises that help us to build our drawing skills from basic, simple objects and shapes into more complicated structures and subject matter. So with that being said, let's get into it. Now, we will be working with a simple set of tools like pencils and pens. However, something that's really important that's going to assist you and kind of make it easier to make a daily practice out of drawing, because that's essentially what you want to be doing, making a daily practice out of it, and ultimately enabling yourself to be a lot more consistent with making a daily practice out of drawing. Now, we're going to be looking at a few different daily drawing exercises. The intention of this guide is to help you establish the fundamental skills that you can use on a daily basis to build your basic understanding of shading and line work. Understanding the basic concepts of the drawing will also help you to maximize your time, and this is why we do want to have a sketchbook. But all these drawing exercises are intended to be done chronologically. Each skill learned will build on the previous one, ultimately helping you progress to more complicated subject matter in a much more doable and less intimidating way. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is learning how to draw some basic shapes. So we're going to start with the basic drawing exercises where we explore fundamental shapes and shading. Now, learning how to shade different shapes with different mediums is also a great way to advance your drawing skills, as well as your understanding of light and shadow, which are two major components of the drawing medium in terms of creating realistic drawings, three-dimensionality, and ultimately defining and refining subject matter into more realistic representations of them. So to make drawing less daunting, the best thing to do is to start small and slowly and build up to a more complex drawing exercise. So we do this by starting with some simplistic three-dimensional shapes where we can focus more on the effects of shading and how to form objects with different shading styles. Now, working with basic three-dimensional structures enables you to also work out shadow and light formations with a drawing, and it is essential to know how to create shadows around objects in spaces that are opposite to the light source. By nature of this, again, we are creating three-dimensionality by representing shadow, and the way in which we represent shadow in a drawing medium is through the process of shading. Now, once you understand the process of shading simple objects where you create seamless transitions within your shading, you can then apply these concepts to more complicated structures. Now, for instance, working on basic shapes also gives you the opportunity to refine your shading skills by exploring different shading methods, and this is where you can look at cross-hatching, smooth shading, depending on the medium which you are using. This is why it's also good to kind of work with various mediums, especially between pens and pencils. These often work really well in isolation for drawing subject matter, but they also work really well in tandem with one another. So working with a combination of various pens and pencils can be a great simple drawing tool to keep on hand, really simple, really doable to keep with you just on a daily basis with a sketchbook. Now, it is also a fun way to explore the different effects that different shading styles can create, such as the scribble technique, for instance. So this technique is a very unique way to shade an object and does have a very unique look. Now, the idea is that sometimes we look at something and we want to draw it as we see it. However, that doesn't necessarily mean we need to actually draw the same sort of shadow transitions that we see in the fabric. Let's say we are drawing someone with clothing, but we can play around with how we represent those qualities with the shading technique or method that we choose. So this is where we want to consider how cross-hatching or scribbling or any other shading technique might be a added value to our actual drawing. And learning how to shade a sphere, for instance, where we start to look at what kind of complicated structures to draw. A sphere is perhaps one of the greatest skills you can learn in terms of representing three-dimensionality in a drawing medium, and this is because the sphere doesn't necessarily have corners. So learning how to create these transitions between shadows in a sphere-like structure or any rounded structure, such as cylindrical structures, any kind of curved surface area, is a really good opportunity to practice your shading transitions. With cornered objects, we can often create different tonal values on different sides of the shape, whereas with a sphere, we are trying to create a more seamless transition in the shadows along the curved surface area. Now, what we want to look at next is kind of using different shading techniques. So again, learning how to shade in simple objects is also a foundational skill that can be applied to more complex objects. Now, this means that we want to use this drawing exercise to explore different mediums for shading. As we get more comfortable with the different shading tools as well, we will have a more confident approach to more complicated subject matter. So the idea now is to try to explore how different shading styles can be utilized with different shapes. For instance, the cross-hatching method is quite a tricky to implement into a shape kind of drawing method. So a sphere is a great way to kind of grasp how light wraps around an object and how shadows form subtly on the other side. And considering maybe utilizing something like smooth shading for that might be effective. But if you want to challenge yourself, maybe looking at how you can represent those subtle transitions between shadow and light with the cross-hatching method can be a really great way to kind of, again, advance yourself within a very unique shading style, but then also kind of creating a very unique effect due to the results of the cross-hatching visual quality. Now, this makes the cross-hatching method a great skill to acquire, especially for moments in a drawing with subtly curved surfaces similar to that of the sphere. And again, it's because it will have this very unique sketchy quality within your drawing. And that's another thing we want to consider when we are sketching and when we are drawing subject matter. We also want to think about what kind of qualities and drawing styled qualities we want to achieve. And if you want to go for something more sketchy, maybe considering the cross-hatching method is a good idea. Now, it is good to try harder forms of shading with simple shapes because the more practiced we are, the more natural it will seem when we are applying them to stranger subject matter. This is also kind of teaching us the concepts of shadow and light, again, which are essential to creating three-dimensionality and realistic qualities within more complicated subject matter. So remember to experiment with different shapes, shading styles, considering how different shading styles create different effects with different shapes, and also keep in mind that shadows and light formations are represented through the use of shading. Shading is the drawing representation of shadow and light. Now, you can explore the effects of using shading in strange ways with simple three-dimensional shapes. For instance, you can draw three-dimensional shapes in their transparent form, allowing all the lines to be visible, and then from there you can shade each visible segment in various directions. Again, this is another unique way to kind of understand how shading can create strange effects within a drawing. But the idea is to build up your exploration of simplistic shapes, shading styles, and ultimately get comfortable with them. So again, explore different shading styles whilst trying different shading effects within your three-dimensional structures. And again, exploring these various methods of shading different segments in single shapes also provides you with a sense of abstract aesthetics that you can achieve through the application of shading. So this is where we can start to see how that concept of shading in various directions can create very unique effects within our drawing. But again, it is about the intention, and working with some simple shapes can be a great foundation as we move to more complicated structures. Now, spend some time on shading in three-dimensional structures or on simple three-dimensional structures until you feel that you have built a base of both forming shapes and shading them in various mediums. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start looking at how drawing simple individual household items can be kind of the step up to advancing our concepts of understanding shadow, light, and three-dimensionality, and ultimately what kind of shading skills we have learned to apply to simple three-dimensional shapes and how we can utilize them within drawing real actual objects. Now, once we have become habitual with practicing shading simple three-dimensional shapes, we can then start to apply these concepts to real-life objects. So we will also find that the knowledge of different mediums and shading styles can be used strategically for textural differences in objects. Now, this is where we're not only considering shadow and light, but we're also starting to think about actual textural qualities of the subject matter that we are drawing. The best way to move on from drawing simple three-dimensional objects is to also start by drawing single household real-life objects. And this can be something like a vase, a cup, a mug, basket of apples, or anything that is quite basic in structure. You'll also start to learn that these objects have the same quality of light and shadow formations as that of the basic three-dimensional shapes. Slowly, as you kind of work through something a little bit more realistic, you'll find that it's not necessarily that different conceptually from drawing simple three-dimensional shapes. Being more responsive to textures, however, in objects starts to make you a little bit more aware of the way objects interact with light light in different ways. So light and shadow will always be fundamentally the same in that they will be present on opposite sides of the object where it may be exposed to a light source. So if the light source is coming from the left, predominantly shadows will be on the right. However, you will find that certain objects are kind of more effective in reflecting light due to their glassy surfaces. So whereas some objects have more of a matte surface and therefore absorb light slightly more and have a more subtle shadow gradients within their surface areas. So that is something we will always want to consider when we're drawing more realistic objects. As we kind of proceed with drawing single objects in our sketchbooks, once again, it is a great exercise that can be done on a daily basis. So as there are various objects from which you can draw inspiration from in your immediate environment, this makes it a very doable exercise, and you could spend something between literally 10 minutes to 2 hours. The idea is just that if you have a sketchbook on hand, the idea is that you can kind of draw wherever you are and spend a good portion of time kind of developing that drawing, and you can also come back to that drawing. So again, just thinking about that daily practice is also really important, especially when you're trying to start drawing realistic objects. So practice becomes really essential, and having something that can enable you to do so quite easily is really important. Now, again, playing around with different surfaces, let's say a vase, for example, will also give you insight into refractions and distortions of light and shadow on the surface of an object. And this is particularly true for smooth surfaces, which make for great drawing exercises in many ways, because we will find that the refractions are so strange and abstract that they're almost easy to draw because of how distinct the lines can be in some cases. And that is because smooth or any shiny object can be really effective in reflecting the environment around it, and sometimes that creates these very abstract, very solid like shapes on the surface area of those actual three-dimensional structures, and that can be kind of easy to represent sometimes because we're actually drawing those simple shapes on that surface area. However, once we start comparing such surfaces with more absorbent and matte surfaces such as fruits, we also start to notice that there are finer details and differences. So simple still life drawings such as these are also really good for observational skills, and that's the intention here. The idea is to kind of understand three-dimensional shapes, working with shadow and shading styles and shading methods, and then applying it to simplistic still life drawings where you can kind of focus even on a single object at a time, but then you start to notice the differences in surface areas. We can then start to also take note of the differences in shadows and light and how they form around these particular objects. So from there we can start to make informative decisions about the mediums and shading styles that we will basically want to use to kind of complement that subject matter. Again, when we are sketching, we're not always trying to make the subject matter as realistically represented in our drawing as we see it in real life, but we can play around with how we kind of represent it through a drawing medium and style. But otherwise, the intention from there is simply a matter of keen observation, which is mostly important for developing your drawing exercises, making sure that we are paying attention to the actual details of the subject matter we are drawing. And this also prepares you for other drawings where you try to capture objects in a short period of time or in motion, such as people, for instance, or moving vehicles, and so on. So still life drawing does allow you to kind of explore the opportunity to advance your observational skills, as it is a practice where you can take your time and really look for long periods at the actual subject matter that you're drawing. In many ways, these exercises will improve your drawing skills, but they will improve your attention to detail in general. So this is quite a fundamental skill for spatial and object awareness, and you will need these for other activities if you are looking to draw people or other structures that are kind of shortly or temporal in your experience of them, or as if they are moving or kind of not there for a long period of time. So understanding concepts of structure, form, shadow, and light in a still life is a great way to enhance your attention to detail. Now, once again, work with some simple tools and try to work out drawing different objects with different mediums, considering the aesthetic qualities of different tools and how they create different surfaces and represent different textures. This is perhaps one of the most essential daily drawing exercises, that of drawing simple objects and still lives, that should be done for a while before moving on to drawing in public spaces, which is where you would kind of try to capture moments in time. So you can explore timed exercises to kind of challenge yourself again with even even simple objects to try and draw them as quickly as you can. And this is a good progressive task for transitioning into drawing more difficult subject matter in real life. However, once you have established a daily practice of still life daily sketches in your sketchbook, you will have created a good and comfortable mentality and foundation for capturing realistic objects in real time, setting yourself up for more advanced drawing exercises, which brings us to the last segment, which is basically daily sketches of people. Now, once you have become comfortable with the drawing of three-dimensional shapes and have applied it to realistic objects that are in a still life formation, this exercise, however, now is intended to be done more quickly, and you can apply those concepts of shading styles, light and shadow, understanding textures, and then now apply it to something more complicated and done in kind of shorter moments of time. That being said, you can obviously go about these drawing exercises from the beginning. You don't necessarily need to build up these foundations. However, it is just a good way to build up your drawing skills to make you more comfortable when drawing people in real life. But another good suggestion is you can have your phone on hand, maybe take photos of spaces and people, obviously with their permission, and then kind of work on those more complicated structures or subject matters. In many instances, we'll find that there are people who are also just sitting around or waiting or eating or spending a long period of time in a space. And this is a good opportunity to capture a figure in an actual still life approach. So, however, we will find that there is always a subtle movement in that person's body language and a shifting in their positions and poses. So these do create a very unique challenge in terms of representing them in real space-time. So the intention, once again, is to apply these foundational skills that you have learned prior by kind of drawing people in these kind of long seated periods where they're not moving a lot, but then also having your opportunity to work with the unique challenge of them shifting, changing their pose, and just kind of having these little subtle movements in their body language. A daily sketch of people is definitely one of the most important and helpful drawing exercises to improve your observational skills because of the variety of details present, because of the very temporal quality of their actual presence. So when doing daily sketches of people, we will be working with various variables in a single drawing, such as clothes, body proportions, light, shadows, and many others. However, fundamentally, the concepts are the same. We are dealing with texture, we are dealing with light and shadow, and we are kind of figuring out how to represent these qualities as best we can with which kind of shading technique or method we choose. Now, the observational drawing exercise increases also your awareness and attention to detail significantly. So this is an exercise that doesn't necessarily have to be detailed when you start out. What's really fun about drawing people is you can start with these very simplistic sketches, almost as if you are doing some basic almost like stick figure sketches or just simplistic figure sketches where you're trying to represent the basic elements of light and shadow as you see them. But as you proceed over time, you'll find that you get really good by establishing these fundamental moments of shadow and light and then refining them through some finer line work and detailing. So you can also begin by creating some kind of like basic vague figure sketch that demonstrates shape and form to work on drawing the more simple body proportions, movements, and poses that you see. So we can also start by playing around with how we bring characters to the foreground and experimenting with background features. Now, this is also a great way to kind of exercise your concepts of depth. So this is also a great exercise you can transition to from still life drawing, because in many ways you are drawing people as you would an object. Now, as we start to draw people, we do want to bear in mind that people are often in different types of attire, which means that there is very much a textural difference and quality in their clothing that you're trying to capture in a drawing. So this is often dedicated to their interactions with light and how shadows form on their clothing. And naturally, once again, this is where we start to think about glassy surfaces, matte surfaces, and just how different textures will kind of respond to light differently. Now, this is obviously a very unique quality when it comes to drawing people, because naturally what we are trying to do is we are trying to again apply these more general concepts of three-dimensionality defined through light and shadow, obviously defined through the process of shading, but then ultimately, once again, this is where we really start to pay attention or consider what type of shading method can be utilized quite strategically to represent various textures. It's also important to explore people in different poses and spaces, as well as people who who are maybe mobile or stationary. So drawing people in these two different states offers two different drawing approaches and experiences. The more we practice drawing people in motion, the more we will be working on our memory related drawing skills. So we'll find that naturally sometimes when you're drawing someone in motion, it's more an opportunity to put down the fundamental and really essential marks that represent that figure that you saw in that temporal space-time moment. But then you can then kind of rely more on your memory to kind of fill in the rest, and that is where the difference between drawing someone who is seated or in a still position for a long period of time differs to drawing someone in motion. Now the other thing once again is exploring different mediums, and we can't emphasize this point enough. We can also use this as an opportunity when we are drawing different people to draw different people in different mediums. So building up from your basic three-dimensional shapes, once again drawing exercises and still lifes, and eventually towards people is a great progression with the skill that can be used interchangeably in each exercise. Allow yourself to explore different drawing mediums for different aesthetic effects in your drawings. Once again, that's where you consider the various textural differences. And then the other thing is for drawing people in motion specifically, a useful detail to take note of is light and how it forms around the figure. So this means that we should take a mental snapshot basically of where the shadows are most significant when they are in motion and where the light is most significant. So from there we can be a little bit more loose in terms of defining those qualities if the figure is not in sight anymore. But once again, this drawing practice should be approached as a daily sketch, which can take time and can be difficult at first. Otherwise, this can take a while, but that is the nature of drawing, and that is something to consider. This is an essential skill to work on when learning how to practice drawing more effectively, so do remember to make daily sketches out of it. And then lastly, a more fun and more simplistic one is daily sketches of space. Preferably, this would be kind of something you've done before drawing people in motion or people as a more complex subject matter, but it doesn't really matter. Once again, you can kind of approach all these different drawing exercises in your own way, but the last exercise is a great way to utilize all the skills learned in previous drawing exercises, and this is because it requires attention to detail. This assemblage of various elements such as light, shadows, and a sense of depth, dealing with various items and structures, drawing spaces is just a really good observational drawing skill and practice to have, as it also develops both your sense of spatial awareness and sense of depth, which is really important. So they are really interesting spaces to draw that often have an assortment of weird structures overlapping one another due to the depth of field. Spaces are also a great challenge in taking note of depth, and the angles from which we are viewing the space is another aspect to consider. But more specifically, sketching spaces is a means of enhancing your depth of field drawing skills. So that is what this is kind of doing. This is where our sense of depth, three-dimensionality, perspective really starts to become the main emphasis of development when we are dealing with drawing spaces. So there are many ways to draw spaces as well. One particular way is we can sketch spaces is by doing quick drawings in areas which we have to basically position ourselves, and then we have to remove ourselves. So it's also that temporal experience of space-time with a subject matter, and that's where you start to kind of put in the main elements and then develop it from kind of a mental snapshot, or kind of as you would think the space can be seen as. And this is where we can see how maybe a space like being in a train, where you only have a short period of time being there, can be a really unique challenge in terms of representing, again, the key things. It's always important to start with light and shadow, placing those down as these fundamental things, and then working in detailing around that. Again, this is similar to drawing people in motion, because there's a great sense of memory exercising that obviously plays a role, and this allows you also to get better in terms of your memory. You'll find that drawing is actually also just another way to enhance your memory, especially when you're drawing things in a temporal space-time kind of approach. Another aspect of drawing spaces is that you can start to assemble the scene like a puzzle. So this is because features in a single space connect structures that lie in the background to features in the foreground. What I mean by this is you'll find that as you start to draw a space and as you refer to the space as you look at it and refer back to your drawing, you'll see that lines start to connect almost like puzzle pieces. This allows you to sketch a scene more confidently, especially if you are to do so in a short time frame. So consider looking at the connecting lines within the space, seeing how the foreground merges with the background and the midground. On the other hand, there are more environments, or many environments rather, that are very unchanging and make for a great meditative and slow drawing experience where you can really focus on various elements one at a time. In these situations, the opportunity for exploring different mediums and tonal values for depth and qualities of distance is much easier and a little bit more slow paced. But again, we don't need to be too precious in the beginning stages of drawing different environments. We can also explore being more suggestive with our marks with the intention of creating an atmosphere or a representation more than a realistic rendition of the space. But otherwise, guys, I'm going to leave you with that for now. Some key things to remember is different drawing exercises obviously point out different skills or develop different skills. So that needs practice, but we will find that all of these skills are interchangeable between different exercises. So the most important thing to remember is to be patient and consistent, and that is why we want to have these more doable goals and have something like a sketchbook and some simple tools on a daily basis. But some key things to remember is the fundamental concepts of fundamental three-dimensional shapes can be applied to any three-dimensional structure. It's a matter of understanding shading as a representation of shadow and light, and then ultimately exploring what kind of mediums and shading methods are strategically a added value to kind of emphasize those qualities and obviously kind of assist you in the result that you are looking for. But otherwise, guys, that is it from me today. If you did like this video, please let us know in the comment section below. If you are interested in similar or related topics, whether it is shading styles, drawing structures, three-dimensional structures, still life, drawing people, you name it, let us know in the comment section below and we will get to that. But otherwise, thanks again. If you did like the video, please do like and subscribe. Show us some love by doing that. That helps us to grow the channel, which ultimately enables us to make more art-related content for you guys. But thank you so much once again for tuning in. Until next time, see ya. Cheers.